Who are the neocons? How would you describe them? What is a neocon?
A neocon is a group of true believers starting that really rose to force in the last years of Bush Sr. It was Cheney, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, but it became absolutely bipartisan. Victoria Nuland is kind of the ultimate.
Yes.
Her husband,
Bob Kagan.
Robert Kagan, is kind of the public intellectual of the neocons. I mean, he is.
I know Bob well.
Yes.
He's an idiot.
Yeah, well,
he's your public intellectual.
He's the guy that writes the tomes that
But he's
say,
a child.
I think that this has been just about the most disastrous foreign policy imaginable. How can you go from peace in 1991, when you have a chance for creating a peaceful, cooperative world that could actually be prosperous and do good things together, to this mess that we're in? It took a strategy so stupid, so reckless, so blind, and that's what the neocons gave us. They gave us a strategy which said, we now run the world. And explicitly, we will be the world's policemen. We will fight the wars that we need to fight whenever and wherever we need to fight them. We will make sure that there's never a rival. Well, you do that long enough, you end up in lots of absolutely destructive, stupid wars. And the rest of the world doesn't just sit back and say, oh, thank you, U.S., we're so grateful you're the leader. They say, come on, you're 4.1% of the world population. There's another 95.9% of the world population that actually would just like peace and some cooperation, and not you to be telling us what to do. So this strategy was explicit, clear, adopted in the last years of basically in 1991-92, after the Soviet Union was dissolved in December 1991. Clinton is just not serious, consequent, or experienced enough. He wasn't a rigid neocon, but Madeleine Albright was a true believer, and Clinton drifted in that direction. And that's also partly something to understand, which is when you have the biggest military machine in the world, when you are so powerful, the war machine is always revving. There's always some case for war. The neocons basically said, yeah, we're the policemen, we're the constabulary. This is our duty. And said you have to be in each of these conflicts because U.S. reputation also depends on this. So they invited regional wars and everywhere and all the time, and believed, of course, we could clean out governments we didn't want, regime change by war, by covert operations, and so on. And it became not a little movement; it became the dominant drive. So Clinton kind of drifted. His administration was divided between Madeleine Albright and Holbrooke on one side and William Perry on the other side, but he went with Albright. By the end of Clinton's term was NATO enlargement, bombing of Belgrade, and we were kind of off to the races. Then came Bush Jr., 9/11, global war on terror, but basically 9/11 as the opportunity to implement the project for the new American century, which is the document that defines the neocon agenda. And it's such an interesting document because very clear, it was very carefully studied, and it's also important to understand the U.S. is a big ship, so it doesn't turn quick, so you prepare a path, or it's this stuck rudder, as I said. And you can read in Rebuilding America's Defenses, which was a kind of campaign document for the incoming Bush Jr. administration, what we should do. And it defines this neocon agenda. So Bush Jr. introduced all of these things, the unilateral withdrawal from ABM, the war in Iraq, the expansion of NATO to 7 more countries, the commitment to expand NATO to Ukraine and Georgia. Then comes Obama. You don't think of him as a neocon especially, but who becomes the point person for Eastern Europe and Ukraine, Victoria Nuland. So interesting. Victoria Nuland was the Deputy National Security Advisor of Cheney.
I remember very well.
Yes. So she was Cheney's advisor. Then she was George W.'s ambassador to NATO during the commitment to enlargement. And if Obama weren't a neocon, you would say, well, that's not someone I'm going to hire. But all of a sudden, she lands as Hillary's assistant. Now, Hillary's absolutely neocon to the core, and there's Victoria Nuland, and she goes from being Hillary's assistant to becoming Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, and becomes the point person in the overthrow of Yanukovych at the end of 2013 and early 2014. And Obama is not, he's also very inexperienced in obviously no experience at all in foreign policy, but he wasn't by nature a neocon, but the system keeps you moving unless you're a president that knows how to keep a foot on the brakes. And we haven't had many presidents like that. Eisenhower was one who knew how to put his foot on the brakes because he really understood this system. John Kennedy learned it, but only after the Bay of Pigs, and probably was killed by our government for trying to keep his foot on the brakes. And there have not been many other occasions when presidents kept their foot on the brakes. So in 2011, Obama does the absolute neocon play of saying, almost out of the blue, by the way, why don't we overthrow Bashar al-Assad, Syria's president? Well, that's a little damn weird, but suddenly you start hearing Assad must go. I was on Morning Joe when that statement by Hillary was made, and Joe Scarborough looked at me and said, Jeff, what do you think? And I said, well, how are they going to do that? That sounds like another pretty stupid idea. And it turned out that was 2011. We've had 13 years of war in Syria, hundreds of thousands dead.
Destroyed the country.
Of course, destroyed the country. And who's president? Bashar al-Assad. And interestingly, I can tell you, oh, God. Yeah, I can tell you. In 2012, the U.S., there were protests, there were things that were going on in Syria, but the president said, okay, we'll send in the CIA to overthrow the government in Syria. And if anyone is wondering, we do this dozens of times, so don't have any illusion that this is unusual. It is the job, the terms of reference of the CIA to overthrow governments in other countries. I don't approve. I think it leads to war, destruction. It hasn't passed Putin's notice that that's the job of the CIA, so it's another reason he doesn't exactly want the U.S. on his border and so forth. Okay, so we start arming the jihadists, crazy things in Syria. Yeah, I can say it. I'm just thinking because... and the U.S. says Assad must go. So the UN starts a diplomatic process to try to find peace, which is the job of the UN. It's not to implement U.S. regime change. It's to try to find peace. So the UN succeeds in getting all of the parties to agree to a peace agreement, except one, the U.S. So the idea that you couldn't find peace, you couldn't find all these different factions in Syria. There was an agreement reached, but there was one obstacle to the agreement, and the obstacle was the U.S. said on the first day of this agreement, Assad must go, and the response was, why don't you have it a process. There'll be in 2 years an election or 3 years. Don't overthrow the government the first day. We have all this in place. And Obama, well, I don't know if it's Obama, probably Hillary, but whatever, said no. So that's why there was no agreement.